So, Céline, you are working with UNHCR. UNHCR is one of the most famous organizations working on refugees. Just could you describe in one sentence about your organization, please? Thank you.
Yes, UNHCR is a UN agency. It's part of the United Nations, and our work is to find solutions, first of all, to protect refugees, people who are forced to flee because of conflict, because of violence, but also to help them find solutions and to work with different partners, governments, but also NGOs, the private sector, and citizens all together to find solutions for their future.
And UNHCR last year organized the first forum, global forum for refugees in Geneva. And could you tell us a little bit more about this forum?
Yeah, this was something very important for us, and it's really linked to what I said. We're working together with everyone to find solutions for refugees, and it's so important that everyone is involved. And with the Global Compact for Refugees, that was adopted by the UN Assembly in December the year before, we have that opportunity now, we have that framework to work with everyone. And we organized that first World Refugee Forum with partners coming from the entire world. Countries who are hosting the majority of refugees worldwide, because we should not forget that the majority of the refugees are in countries neighboring the countries they fled. So they are in countries neighboring Syria, neighboring Afghanistan, or the neighbors of South Sudan. So partners came from those countries, but also from European countries. So there were more than 3,000 people in Geneva to talk about the situation, but mainly to pledge more support, to see how we can work together. So there were more than 800 pledges at the forum to find solutions for refugees in the area of access to employment, access to education, but also financial support for emergencies. So that was a crucial moment. And now we're working with different partners on the follow-up and how those 800 pledges will become reality and what are the projects that will be put in place. So a lot of work ahead, but a lot of hope and a lot of motivation to work together.
So now we have 71 million refugees, internal displaced, including 26 million of refugees. Josephine spoke about climate change. What is the approximate number for 2030 with climate change displacement, like 200 million? Or do you know the figures? Or what UNHCR predict? And not only predict, but how are you going to face the challenges of flow of refugees caused by natural catastrophe?
You know, of course, it's a difficult answer because we can't predict. And we don't want to predict catastrophes, disasters, and at the contrary, we want to work for solutions, hope. But it's true, 71 million people are displaced today because of violence, because of conflicts. That does not include people who leave their country for other reasons, including climate change. With the current situation, unfortunately, the numbers may rise. And if we look at the number of people who have been displaced because of disasters, for example, in 2018, there were 17 million people displaced because of disasters. Over the last 10 years, according to the statistics we have, there were more than 200 million people displaced because of disasters. So we need to find solutions for that. And we, as the UN Refugee Agency, it's also one of our priorities. It's one of the concerns. What can we do to mitigate, to prevent the risks as well? And again, at the Global Refugee Forum in Geneva, we also discussed that, and there was a commitment that was taken by different partners, is to make sure that by 230, refugees, all the refugees, will have access to clean energies. Because that's also something very important, to work together with the displaced people to find solutions and to allow them to have access to clean energies. Because so far, 90% of the refugees living in refugee camps don't even have access to energies. So they're going to use wood. And we have to find solutions also, to mitigate the impact on climate change. So we're working towards that. And then, of course, maybe another point I can mention, which is very important, is that climate and conflict together can lead people to flee. And climate, unfortunately, can be like a multiplier. There can be a multiplier effect. And I can give concrete situations in which people who were displaced were again in extremely difficult situations because of the climate. So, for example, in Bangladesh, refugees from Myanmar who are living in Bangladesh, in what is now the biggest refugee camp in the world, were affected by the monsoon, were forced again to just leave their small shelters. Same in South Sudan last year. So for all of that, we have to work together and find solutions.
What UNHCR does for refugees in France?
So in France, maybe just to put that in the context, we are present in more than 150 countries worldwide. The majority of our work and operations is in countries hosting the majority of the refugees. I mentioned some of the countries before, but we're also present in other countries, including in Europe, where we are present since a long time because UNHCR was created, in fact, in Europe, because UNHCR was created to find solutions for the people forced to flee the Second World War. So we have established an office very quickly in France. So here we work with different partners to work together, and also in France to find solutions for refugees. So our work is related as well to technical expertise. We're not like an operational actor in France. We're not implementing programs to help like we do in other countries, but we're here to work with partners, share our expertise, monitor the situation, share advice to find together solutions, and that includes also advocacy work, and it's part of my work as well, to work with different partners and see how together we can find solutions, we can innovate for access to employment, access to education, and also even like finding solutions to meet the basic needs of people, refugees who arrive in France.
So tell me what UNHCR took to commit and accomplish the 17 Sustainable Development Goals by 2030.
Maybe I will take one of them. If
Only one of them. Which one?
Education.
Education.
And I heard...
Number 4?
Number 4.
Number 4.
Inclusive education, or quality,
Quality education.
And I said inclusive because, this is what we advocate for. But I heard in your introduction, you were mentioning access to employment and, better future. But the key for all of that is access to education. And the SDGs, the Agenda 2030, has a promise, which is to leave no one behind. And that's very important for our work. It's very important to include refugees, displaced persons, in our work to attain the SDGs. So we work together again with partners to reach that, and to include refugees, displaced people in the national systems, education systems. So we work with governments to make sure that refugees in the countries where they arrive have access to education, to formal education, to quality education. For that, we need to support partners. And again, to support countries, we need to work with different partners, including the private sector. And I don't want to mention too many figures, and we've mentioned already a few figures, but I think there are some that are very important when it comes to access to education and why that's so important for refugees. We know that worldwide, 91% of the children have access to primary education. They can go to primary school. So that's the figure worldwide. Only 63% of refugees have access to primary school. And then the gap increases when you look at secondary education. So for secondary education, 84% of children who are in age to go to secondary education go to secondary education. For refugees, it's only 34%. So our priority is now to bridge that gap and make sure refugee children can have access to education with really an emphasis on secondary education. So what does that mean? It also means to help in terms of infrastructure, to help the countries who are hosting refugees to include refugees in secondary education. And higher education is also, very important. And there only 1% of young refugees have access to higher education. University, but also like professional, education. So there, we work with universities to advocate also for scholarships, because that's the future. It's the future, but it's also to protect, again, refugees and kids, because also the schools are a safe place. So it's very important, and also, for their mental health, and to help them to build their future. So if, only one SDG, that's the one. And of course, working together with different partners, and that's the last SDG, so that's also very important.
And thank you for mentioning about mental health, because I think it's an issue that we don't focus so much, but I guess it's like 70% of refugees suffer of mental health, depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And for what I understood, when you suffer of PTSD, you are like 75% dead, which means you disconnect mind, body, and spirit. And I would like to know what your organization is doing to help on working on mental health program.
You said, it's extremely important. And unfortunately, it cannot always be a priority when people flee, when they arrive in a country, because the priority is to really meet the basic rights, like the humanitarian help in the first stage of an emergency, to make sure people can have access to a roof, like a shelter, medical assistance, food, so these are the priorities that are very often considered, also by donors, as priorities, what you need to do to help refugees. And we are advocating for, like access to mental health being also something crucial and considered as a priority. And we're developing programs in different countries to meet the needs. So I mentioned before Bangladesh. From the onset of the emergency, we had a colleague going to different shelters and talking to the refugees, advising them and organizing sessions. Because it was very important from the onset of the emergency to make sure people can have access to counseling. We have another program I can mention, for example, in Libya, because we are present in Libya, and Fabienne was mentioning before their work, rescuing people who've been in Libya, who've been detained in Libya. We are there. We have a program, a humanitarian evacuation program of people who are in need of protection, refugees in Libya. Many of them are detained in detention centers, including children. We have developed there again a program to help to work with the children who have gone through a terrible experience on the way to Libya, fleeing conflict, but then being detained. The consequence is that they can't sleep at night. Sometimes they're being aggressive, and they need help. So with a local organization, we've developed a program to help them to overcome their trauma. And we have those kinds of projects in different countries, depending, on the needs. And also, what is very important for us is that we work with local actors, local NGOs, and directly the communities. So these are a few examples. I could give more, but time is limited. So I just wanted to give these 2 examples because they're very important programs for us.
Thank you very much, Céline Schmitt. Thank you very much for listening. The panel of refugees is closed now.
Thank you.